Okay, Unit 6, Part 2. We left off with large supplies of capital being available due to profitable commercial activity in Great Britain, and so that's going to lead into our entrepreneurs who are willing to take a risk with that money, having an inventive sense and being highly motivated to make more money, taking that money and saying, hey, I can get rich by taking a risk, taking this extra money that we have from the Bank of England and all the things we've talked about and turning it into a profit through industrialization. We also have some religious reason here because Calvinists in the middle class were driven by the Protestant work ethic. Like work is to the glory of God, and God will give you glory back for your work. And so unlike other countries like Spain who don't have this religious work ethic, England is also going to have this, contributing to, that 7 layers or reasons why England is the first country to industrialize. We also have colonial empire. Britain's colonial empire is going to allow it to take raw materials from within its empire and bring it back to the motherland, and being able to develop its industry with these raw materials. So it takes like the cotton from India and Egypt, and it's going to produce textiles. Textiles, again, being the most important industry within England for industrialization. And then they sell the goods that they make with that cotton from Egypt and India right back to continental Europe and India and Egypt. They sell them the shirts or whatever products. They're like really influxing their exports, which is good. It's mercantilist, but what we're going to see is that England isn't mercantilist on the interior anymore with the role of government. Remember, the English had their revolution, the Glorious Revolution, in 1688. So 101 years before the drama that's going on in continental Europe right now, while they're all worried about France, and France is worried about France. So the government in England is very sympathetic to the industrial development of its country. Limited monarchy at this time after the Glorious Revolution is going to mean that government doesn't stifle the growth and expansion of the middle class, as is the case in France and Russia right now. This stable government will also lead to parliamentary legislation that was favorable towards the growth of industry. We have the Bubble Act, if you remember, of 1720 that we talked about in Unit 4.2, which had been that fear of joint stock companies, is going to be repealed and again allow for the creation of joint stock companies. Now you have more joint stock companies, you're going to have more money, you have more investors, you have less of a risk as a business owner, which is going to be shown in the Lowe's Act, where like if a worker gets hurt or your product accidentally kills someone, there's limited liability for the business owner. And along with that, the corporations that have now been allowed to exist due to the repeal of the Bubble Act are going to limit the liability of the personal business owner, so it allows them to take even more risk with that capital that they have. We also have the repeal of the Navigation Acts, which we had talked about were very mercantilist and had been focused at the Dutch when the English first enacted them, and also the repeal of the Corn Laws is going to decrease mercantilism's stifling effect in certain industries, especially the textile industry, which is really going to grow in industrialization. And so those textiles, or the growing demand for textiles, is going to lead to the creation of the world's first large factories. This demand for textiles is the key to our first industries. Constant shortage of thread in the textile industry have focused attention on ways of improving spinning. What are ways of improving things? New technology. Those inventions of proto-industrialization, which we've hit several times, are going to facilitate increased production. And as machines get bigger, and they're wanting to draw more people out of that cottage industry because of its problems, that is going to equal our factory system, or our industrialized factory. And we're going to get into another important piece of technology, the steam engine, because the steam engine's application to the textile production industry was perhaps the key event of the Industrial Revolution. In the 1780s, Richard Arkwright had used the steam engine to power the looms, and required factory production of textiles. 1784, Edmund Cartwright will invent a loom that was powered by horses, water, or steam. We're also going to see further results of this new technology in the amount of production that's put out. By 1790, new machines produced 10 times as much cotton yarn as in 1770. Why? Because these new machines were more efficient. By 1800, 1800, production of cotton thread was England's most important industry. And by 1815, England will produce more than half of the world's cotton cloth. We're going to come back to that. But you'll want to note that they're producing more than half of the world's cotton cloth. And by 1820, cotton was almost half of Britain's exports. So cotton is huge for Britain. Cotton goods will become cheaper at this time, especially the goods that they're exporting into the continent, which means that cotton goods can be enjoyed by all classes now. I don't know if you've ever worn a wool sweater, but can you imagine wearing wool underwear? I mean, just the fact that people, like even lower classes, can afford to wear cotton underwear instead of wool. I mean, can you imagine trying to work in wool underwear? So that's going to be a big deal right here. So we need to get into how it gets even more efficient. What's the technology behind this? And that is steam engines and coal. The use of coal to power steam engines is one of the hallmarks of the Industrial Revolution. This is where we just take it up a notch, okay? The revolution in energy involved a transition from wood burning to coal burning. This is an energy change from wood to coal, because prior to 1780, processed wood, or charcoal, was the fuel mixed with iron ore and the blast that will produce what is called pig iron. Pig iron, I think, got its name because the cast that they put pig iron in would look like a sow with its like piglets attached to it, I think, is the backstory to that. But anyway, pig iron only got so hot. And also, we're having a problem with deforestation. There are not enough trees in England. That is not a raw material that they have a surplus of. And so using that as an energy source would not have allowed them to industrialize the way they did. And so we're going to need to turn to a new source, which is coal. It is a hotter, better source to heat up the water, which will produce the steam. So coal is going to provide steam power used in many industries, and by 1815, England will produce 2/3 of the world's coal. Okay, so very important. So we have, half of the cotton industry. We have them really taking their place. We've talked about the 100 years of Britain, and this is where it is. Industrialization really making that a possibility for them, along with, having their revolution much earlier and being able to focus their energy on other things than chopping people's heads off. So, the steam engine. Thomas Savoy of 1698 and Thomas Newcomen of 1705 will invent the steam pump to pump water out of mines. So they have this problem, like the mines are filling up with water and they need to come up with a way to get it out. Technology is always brought on by necessity. But they weren't that good, okay? Because like horses were first, making these pumps move. It was still animal labor, and they were severely inefficient. And so then we're going to get James Watt in 1769 is going to invent and patent the first efficient steam engine. And so after his invention, by the late 1780s, the steam engine will be used regularly in production in England. It's just so much more efficient than animal labor, and steam and being able to use the coal, like huge contributors to this. So you need to circle, the steam engine was the most fundamental advance in technology. The most fundamental advance in technology in the Industrial Revolution. It began to replace water power, so you can now have mills that were not on water. Even though England had this surplus of waterways, this is going to allow industrialization in other areas. Radical transformations will occur in manufacturing and transportation due to the steam engine, because we're going to see here in just a second steamboats, the locomotive, railroads, all of these things are going to come out of this. And also, the iron industry will be radically transformed by steam power. Rising supplies of coal are going to boost iron production. More coal equals more iron. Iron makers are going to switch over rapidly from charcoal to coke, which is a product made from coal, and the smelting of pig iron. And then Henry Court in the 1780s is going to develop the puddling furnace, which you can see a picture of it here. And Henry Court as well. And it's going to allow for that pig iron, which had kind of been, I don't know, a better phrase than like crappy iron. I mean, better than they had in building products before, but it was brittle, okay? Like you would not want to be in a pig iron belt structure. It was brittle, okay? And so Court is going to develop a heavy duty system powering with rolling mills capable of shaping finished iron into any shape or form. And he is going, with this puddling furnace, be able to produce wrought iron. I don't know if you've ever seen like a wrought iron fence, but like very strong. Okay, like you think about like old Victorian houses with the wrought iron fences outside, but the strongest form of iron we're going to see, up to this point, it has less carbon in it, which makes it less brittle. And by 1815, England will produce more than half of the world's iron. And so, I mean, they're really supplying half of the world with almost all of the most important goods at this point. Then the steam engine, I told you, is going to be very important as we move forward in the transportation revolution. The steam power is going to make other forms of transportation possible. And transportation is necessary to distribute finished goods as well as to deliver raw materials to factories. You have to be able to get goods from place to place and get them cheaply so you can make a profit. We needed this change to happen to move products efficiently, or the Industrial Revolution may not have taken the drastic turn that it did, or revolutionized the world as the way it did. We're also going to have a new canal systems. I just want to mention we're still in England here. We'll get to continental Europe in a little while, but they're dealing with the French. They're dealing with Napoleon. Okay, so new canal systems are going to help us with moving heavy stuff. I mean, this is going to link those waterways, which were in abundance in England. The Duke of Bridgewater is going to be important in this development. I mean, what a great last name to be a canal builder, right? So canals are important in completing the basic needs of related interdependent industries. So it's going to connect our railroad industry, which we're going to get to, our steel industry, and our coal industries, and all facilitated by the power of steam. We're also here going to have the improvement to roadways. So ground transportation in another way, just like canals are going to improve water transportation, ground transportation is going to be improved by a man named John McAdam. He is going to pioneer hard surface roads. So if you see here, you have this hard surface road, you have big rocks, large stones at the bottoms, then you have small filler stones, and you have gravel on top. And so water will seep down instead of puddle and collect and go out, and then water on the top of the road will run off into these ditches here. And so it will improve, like some roads weren't passable for most of the year. You can see the working here, the laying of gravel. And so very important in ground transportation. After that, in 1807, you're going to get, as you see here, here's a picture of Robert Fulton and his steamboat, the Clermont, will travel up the Hudson River from New York City to Albany. He's going to use part of the Watt steam engine patent, also with an important addition with Bolton, and going to make two-way river travel possible. So you don't just have to go, with the current. You can go against it with the use of steam. In 1838, the first steamship will cross the Atlantic Ocean. Guys, this is like less than 200 years after the Pilgrims made their journey on like what would just seem like a shack on water now compared to the steamboat. So in 1838, the first steamship will cross the Atlantic Ocean, and that gets us into the railroad. So steam is going to be harnessed and finally put on rails here, as we see. In 1812, a steam wagon will be adapted for the use on rails. 1825, George Stephenson will make railway locomotive commercially successful. He is going to take that, the early ones, and he's going to be the first one to really pioneer one that's going to be able to make money. Like, it's not going to cost more to use one than it would have just been to transport your goods on a road. By 1829, the locomotive was widely used in England, and in 1830, his locomotive, I think it's kind of an ironic name, but I guess at the time this would have been fast, called the Rocket, traveled the Liverpool-Manchester Railway at 16 miles an hour. I mean, tie yourself down, 16 miles an hour. It was the world's first important railroad, as it was in the heart of industrial England, taking things from the coast inward. Okay, so very important to industrialization. More private companies are going to build rail lines in the 1840s, which will become very important to transportation. And what's the impact of the railroad? I mean, exactly what you would think it is. Greatly reduce the cost of shipping freight on land, the cost of taking things from the ports inland. It will result in growing regional and national market to meet larger demands that now transportation can take care of, and will facilitate the growth of the urban working class who will come from the countryside. many cottage workers or farm laborers are going to begin getting jobs building the railroads, and those that aren't building the railroads are going to get transportation into cities to work in our industrial jobs that are going to be coming up here in just a little bit. So let's just take a snapshot of Great Britain in 1850. Okay, greatest country at this time. We're in the 100 years of Britain. 1850, producing 2/3 of the world's coal, produced more than half of the world's iron, produced more than half of the world's cotton cloth. The gross national product is going to rise between 1801 and 1815 350%. I mean, that is like, we're rising at like 1% right now, 350% between 1801 and 1850, 100% growth between 1780 and 1800. Population at this time in England will increase from 9 million in 1780 to almost 21 million in 1851. Talk about laborers being around, and we're going to talk about the largest and fastest growing class of people here in just a little bit. The per person wealth or per capita income will increase almost 100% between 1801 and 1851. Although the economy is going to increase faster than population growth, which is a good thing because it's going to create a higher demand for labor, which is going to create a whole new class of people, which we're going to talk about. I think one of the greatest symbols of this time period and what England is doing and what the rest and what continental Europe is dealing with is the building of the Crystal Palace. It's commissioned by Prince Albert, who is the husband of Queen Victoria, who we're going to be talking about here very shortly in our next units. They're going to build the Crystal Palace, which is a glass structure with iron supports, and it is just like Versailles was Louis XIV's statement. This is England's statement about we are the number one industrial power in the world, and we have the most technological might. Okay, this is just a symbol of that. This is just like the Europeans do great. They are building a symbol of their greatness in this time period. To just give you a point of view from continental Europe, Napoleon is building the Arc de Triomphe at this time. So while continental Europe is focused on these military battles and revolutions, England is focused on showing its power as an industrial nation. So speaking of continental Europe, we need to talk about what's going on there. Okay, we know England went first. We've talked about the reasons the continent is late. Continental Europe will not begin to industrialize until after 1815. To give you some back note, I'm just not dismissing continental Europe. In the 1780s, they have been pretty on par with where England was, but they get put behind by the chaos of 1789, by the French Revolution. All eyes turn to the concerns of France, right there in the middle of it. How's it going to affect us? They have too much on their plate to continue moving forward with industrialization. It's not until after the Napoleonic Wars of 1815 that we will see industrial growth spreading to the continent. But you know, one thing to be said about that is that sometimes it's not too bad to be second. I mean, if you're not first, you're last. Maybe Ricky Bobby wasn't exactly correct in this, because if you get to watch other people go through it, continental Europe have watched British, they've been buying British goods. They've learned from their mistakes. They've learned from all the little missteps. They've learned from all of the laws that shouldn't be enforced. They've learned, they've seen the path before them, and that's going to allow the learning curve to be much quicker. They're going to catch up quickly, but it's going to differ in each place. Okay, each country is going to differ in when they industrialize and how they industrialize. So Belgium, Holland, France, and the U.S. will begin their industrial revolutions in the second decade of the 19th century, while Germany, who is going to really try to take over and will be the only one competing with Britain in industrialization, like right neck to neck up to World War I. Germany is going to kind of take this lead in trying to unify economically before they unify politically. Okay, and then of course we know in World War I, Britain and Germany are going to beat each other up, and yay, we get to step into first place, go us, because they were too busy with each other. But now, we're slipping, and pretty soon be number 2 because China's going to be number 1. But, anyway, we stepped in after World War I and took that place because, as Europeans do, they got distracted by other things. Eastern Europe, though, always behind, industrialized much later, always trying to catch up with the West. So how do we get caught up? We steal. to get caught up. We steal the technology from Britain. I put borrowed here, but we steal it. You can put steal there if you want. We offer British engineers tons of money. We gain British capital. We copy. We try to make our learning curve, much quicker, much easier. We're going to use the power of strong sovereign central governments and banking systems to promote native industries in continental Europe. We're going to follow their lead and create stock companies and banks and increase capital. I mean, they've paved the road. Well, that's what worked. Let's do it. We're going to, just follow Britain's lead, and we don't have to worry about the mistakes they made because we know that they're there. Banks in France and Germany are going to become important in the 1850s, and developing railroads and companies and heavy industries. So, right there, taking the lesson from Britain, the Credit Mobilier is going to be Paris's most famous bank and help build railroads. We're also going to talk about a scandal later coming up here, second semester. So Britain was just totally unsuccessful in maintaining a monopoly on technological advances. Not that they didn't try. I mean, A for effort right here, Britain. Until 1825, they had made it illegal for artisans and skilled mechanics to leave Britain. Can give you an example. You had an 8th or 11th grade. I don't know when you had it, but the mills in the United States actually started as some guy from Britain who memorized all of the plans coming over and selling them to the U.S. So not successful. Many will still immigrate illegally and introduce new methods abroad because you know what? They were capitalists. They were venture merchants. They just want to line their pockets. That's what they've been doing. And so if you're going to pay for it, they're going to bring it. Until 1843, the export of textile machinery and other equipment was also forbidden. But you know what? It was big money, and so they would do whatever it would take to get those out of the country. So they failed in not letting their technology leave their country. They had the right idea. They wanted to stay ahead of the curve and not wanting to let their ideas leave their country and make that country competitive with them. They had tried tariff policies to protect native industries. But the continent is going to do the same thing using tariffs to protect their industry. Why? Why would the continent do this? Well, they've been watching Britain. And if Britain is number one, and you are competing with them, then you have to make it difficult for them to sell in your country. You've got to stop those cheap goods that have been coming in during your time of chaos from coming in. You have got to put tariffs up to make those goods more expensive so your native industry will flourish. And they've seen the British do this, and they are just reacting in that same way. So like France will respond in enacting high tariffs on many British goods because they have been flooded during the French Revolution with inexpensive and superior British goods. In 1834, the Zollverein, which you need to know, was a German tariff on non-German imports, and it was established to encourage capital investment in German industry. This is important because Germany is actually going to unify economically, as I said, before they are politically. This is what's going to kind of draw them together, even after the unification of Napoleon. Although they're not a country yet. They're going to establish a free trade zone among member states, and a single uniform tariff was levied against foreign countries. So they're going to come it's going to be like their, their United States of Germany. They're going to unify economically. Free inside, but tariff for outside goods. Why? So they can stimulate German production. They come together economically way before they come together as a nation. I mean, I can give you an instance like after World War II, after Europe beat the crap out of each other, they create the European Union. They come back together economically up until about the 1990s. That is how they re-solidified Europe. Wasn't politically, they were still not on the same page, but economically. So it's like a trend that they follow after World War II. I mean, are we going to see maybe the United States of Europe at some point, economically? I mean, they tried to do the thing with the euro, which the euro is hurting right now, but I mean, coming together with one money, I don't know. Is that still in the works? Can it be? I mean, 'cause there's really only one strong country in Europe right now, Germany, and then Britain. I mean, so maybe I don't know, maybe they'll follow that trend again. The most significant result of this was increased production and availability of manufactured goods in the continent. We need to talk about then economically. We've talked about Britain and we've talked about the continent. But what about socially? Okay, so what are the social implications of the Industrial Revolution? How did it affect society? Well, first of all, we're going to replace the traditional social hierarchy with a new social order. The top, middle, bottom that we had is going to be all shifted around. And the 19th century is going to become the golden age of the middle class or the bourgeoisie. Okay, the middle class is going to be superior here. And you talked about them in France. Maybe this is just the world's way of giving back to them. A new class of factory owners emerged in this period, the bourgeoisie, and it will break into two groups then. We won't have one unified bourgeoisie, but we're going to have a top and a bottom. So the upper bourgeoisie are going to be like our great bankers, our merchants, our industrialists who demanded free enterprise and protective high tariffs. These are our big industrialists. And then we're going to get our lower bourgeoisie, which are sometimes called the petite bourgeoisie or petit bourgeoisie, which are small industrialists. There are merchants and professionals, I don't know, like teachers, lawyers, doctors, men who demanded stability and security from the government. So they're still wanting protection, but they're wanting like hands-on, like protect us from these. Like we want our time too, under the big industrialists. And then we're going to see new opportunities for certain groups emerging during this time period. Artisans and skilled workers who were highly talented, so they possess like a skill, like they were highly trained in a skill, are going to achieve significant success because their skill equals mobility within the system. We're also going to see certain ethnic and religious groups become successful, Quakers, Scots, Protestants, and Jews. As factories grow larger, opportunities, however, for advancement are going to decline in well-developed industries. So this is kind of on the flip side of that coin. Like, so these big businesses have gotten so big that it is harder for these skilled artisans to become wealthy manufacturers because the big businesses have got so big. Harder to get in. You're competing against these huge developed businesses. So mobility is lessened. Like you think about, okay, like in the Bill Gates, like in his new garage or whatever, and like you're another guy in your garage, you can like compete there. You were competing at the same time, and you both get big business. But I mean, can you imagine now like going to your garage and trying to compete with like Bill Gates or Zimber, whatever, the Facebook guy? I mean, no, like it's like really hard. Like that's been taken. Like that, I don't know. What would you do? And so formal education becomes one of the only means or most important means of social advancement for people at this time who weren't traditionally in the big business, who were that lower bourgeoisie, the petite bourgeoisie. But the cost was often prohibitive to those below the middle class. So mobility really gets stifled here if you aren't already in the big business category. And then we're going to see that it's going to be just like systems we've seen set up before. It comes down to inheritance after that in 1830 and 1860. Okay, and this is that we're going to get into that new and fastest growing social class that I preluded to earlier, and that's the proletariat. These are our wage earners. How you can compare them with the bourgeoisie is that they don't own property. And like the bourgeoisie are landed, like they own property. And so our difference here is the proletariat are like our factory workers. And because we're in the Industrial Revolution, they are going to emerge as a new group in society and the fastest growing social class. They are mostly comprised of peasants pushed off of land by the enclosure movements who have migrated to the cities looking for jobs. So they went from laboring out in the farms to laboring in cottage industries to moving to the cities looking for jobs, the proletariat. During the first century of the Industrial Revolution, a surplus of labor is going to result in poor conditions for workers. Why? You got like, I don't even know the numbers to be on the street. Those are like 400 guys staying outside of a door waiting for you to like open like Willy Wonka's factory. Come in. You're just waiting for that job, and they know that, and so they can give the guys in their lower pay because there's somebody waiting on the street who sure would just like any kind of pay, which means that we don't really care what the conditions are like in here for you because it's a lot better than having no food and standing out there in the line. And so this is really going to create a situation that we're going to follow through with this lecture of poor conditions for workers and what's going to come out of that. So hours in factories could equal as much as 14-hour days, occasionally more. Few holidays, so few times off, which, you know, if you've been working in the cottage industry, you were like partying, going to weddings, setting your own hours. This is a big change. Low wages, particularly for women and children, and working conditions brutal and unsafe. just because they know that if you don't step up to do it, or you complain, or you don't feel safe, someone else is going to do it because they need a job. In the same token, poorhouses are going to emerge to provide work to those who are unemployed because there's not enough jobs for the people who've moved to the city for jobs. But the poorhouses were intentionally impressive. They were brutal to force people to go out and try to find a job. It wasn't like, oh, come here, we're going to take care of you. It was like, no, like this is going to be even worse than the working conditions in the factories. And this is where we get like this guy, Frederick Engels, 1820 to 1895 is his lifespan, lashing out at the middle classes, lashing out at the upper middle classes who are making all of the money off of this. It's the golden age of the middle class, and he gives us the condition of the working class. His work in 1844 about the industrial family and the condition of the working class in 1844. You probably already know this, but I mean, Marx gets most of the credit, but he was a colleague of Karl Marx, who will be a future revolutionary, and who both believe that the capitalist middle class ruthless exploitation of the proletariat was a big problem. Okay, they're making all the money while the people doing the real work that are moving the industry along are not only not making that profit, they're being treated very oppressively. And he gives us the quote, I charge the English middle classes with mass murder, wholesale robbery, and all the other crimes in the calendar. And this is going to be the beacon quote of the bourgeoisie upper classes exploiting the workers, and give us a new view, a negative view of the bourgeoisie or middle class, which is going to bring us into communism, and later socialist, which we're going to talk about, of course, in second semester, because that profit going to the top and the workers are not doing well. And so what are the issues with the workers? The issues of working conditions, wages, and quality of life will lead to struggles between the proletariat, the labor, and capital, or the capitalist. But I want to digress here for a second, not to tick off any socialist or communist, because we need to talk about the fact that for workers and ordinary families, the actual long-term impact of the Industrial Revolution will be more favorable than negative. Because between 1820 and 1850, real wages and consumption of the average worker will actually rise almost 50%. So closer to 1850, we're going to see a better lifestyle, a better life than we had seen previously. But we're going to see some really serious problems arise right in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. But the long-term effects are actually going to be better for the workers and ordinary families in the long run, but we're going to come back to some of the problems that faced them right at the beginning. I mean, in the long run, workers are going to be able to eat better, quality and quantity of clothing will improve. I mean, no more wool underwear, that's a big thing, right? Housing, however, city life is something we're going to come back to here in just a couple minutes, is not going to improve for working people. In fact, it's going to deteriorate somewhat. I mean, if you just think about how fast these cities had to come together, the conditions, the sanitary, they weren't ready. Okay, so it's going to get better by 1850, but in the beginning, it's going to be a very bad city life. And until 1850, until we get up to that time point, in second semester, workers as a whole will not share in the general wealth produced by the Industrial Revolution. And that is the problem that we're going to get into right now. So we won't see an improvement until 1850. So we're going to have a group of people who very quickly were like, life, not good. Like, like technology. They hate new technology. They want their old life back. It's like those people that say, oh, you remember back in the good old days. You know, they are a violent group of people called the Luddites. They are irate workers, the proletariat, who blame industrialism for threatening their jobs. Because remember, at first, many people had employment. There's all these people. We talked about the population increase and all these available labor forces. But with the better machines, with increased technology, it's going to take less people. Remember all the spinners, all the spinsters, all the people employed in the cottage industry? Now there are not so many needed because of machines. So it's kind of like, the age of the Terminator. Machines will take us out. Machines are the enemy. the Luddites are going to, in 1812, right in this industrial period when it's bad, when conditions are bad, and when there aren't enough jobs for all of the people out there, are going to continue to attack factories in northern England, destroying new machines that they believed were putting them out of work. They're going to break in and destroy. They're angry. I mean, just really angry. I mean, if you even think about like Henry Ford and the assembly line and how many people you saw in those pictures, like to give you more, you maybe familiar example, there's all those people staying there doing every part of the job. Now, like you see the car commercials on TV, how many people are manning the machines that build the cars? So they were afraid of these machines. I mean, we still even use this term today, like Luddites, like those people, I mean, there's even people in your classes that are like, oh, this dang iPad, this, so, like, I just want to go back to the good old days of word. So Luddites, they were afraid of the technology. They're going to start this movement of machines. They're destroying everything. They're taking jobs. They're displacing, the working class. And then we're going to also get a union movement where certain leaders begin to organize groups of workers to resist exploitation of the proletariat working class by a business owner or a capitalist. They want the same thing that you hear out of labor unions today: better pay, better conditions, safer conditions. And what are we going to do if you don't give them to them? We're going to strike. Okay, so we're going to start to organize. And so the English government is not going to respond very well to this at the beginning because they're manned by those capitalists, and so they are going to start to prohibit labor unions. And a lot of this has to do with the reaction to fear of radicalism in the French Revolution. Remember how out of control it got when the urban working class, the sans-culottes, got control? They don't want any of that, but it is just going to be widely disregarded by workers and will be repealed in 1824, and unions will become tolerated after 1825. I mean, it's just really the labor unions. I mean, as you know, U.S. history, it's just really going to take off, and it's not going to be able to be settled down because it's our fastest and largest and growing class at this time period. And this is where we get Robert Owen. He's going to kind of take a more radical approach to it. In 1834, he's going to organize the Grand National Consolidated Trade Union. And really what he wants is like a utopian industrial society. I mean, he's like really like off to the side here. He is going to say that like you need firm discipline in industry, but you also need to really take into account health, safety, and work hours. You like build up little towns around your factory, and you provide them, with income and housing and all of these things. And he's going to experiment really with utopian, cooperative, socialist, or shared community. So it's kind of like we're moving towards socialism and communism, which is going to be a topic we're going to really hit on second semester. But ultimately, he is going to fail. His and other more, extreme unionization efforts are going to fail, and the British labor movement will move once again after 1851 in the direction of like more like craft unions, like protecting people of certain skilled trade. So unionization will continue on. And then we get a group called the Chartists, and they are for things that improve working conditions, but they're going to say that the way to improve working conditions is the need to the right to vote. Remember, at this time, only landed or land-owning aristocracy can vote in Great Britain. And so they're going to push for universal suffrage. Our way to get out of these bad conditions is that all men, the proletariat included, have the right to vote. And through the vote, we'll be able to get rid of this oppressive economic system of exploitation. They're going to campaign for 10-hour days, 10-hour working days, and to permit duty-free imports of wheat into Britain to secure cheap bread. So back to bread again. Everybody needs to eat for a reasonable price. The Union Act, combined with general prosperity and a developing social conscience, will lead to improved working conditions, better wages, and reduced working hours. And this is going to come in part with a reaction to the changes in working conditions that have taken place for these people at this time. If you remember, we've been working in agriculture as a family. We've been coming in and working as a family in the factory, all of these extra laborers coming in. But factory work was very different than it had been in the countryside. In the countryside, I remember we had like the cottage industry was like, oh, we'll go to wedding, drink, and we'll get the product when we want to, and we set our old time. But then work is going to become very impersonal. You're going to get you're not going to have that family farm freedom that you had before, the ability to just go party when you wanted. At factory, it's a bell for break, a bell for lunch. Everything is like a bell to tell you what to do. I mean, the school was set up on the factory system, and I'm not going to rant. I promised I wouldn't. But before this, you had just had more say in when you got your work done. These cottage workers were then very reluctant to work in factories, even for decent wages, because the environment was just so radically different than the working environment we'd seen up to this time. Um, the early factories, I mean, they were bad up until, like the 1850s, when things are going to really start to change. Child labor is going to be exploited. And the causes for increased child labor is because of the system that was set up prior to this. In the farm, you worked with your children all day. In the cottage industry, you worked with your children all day. This was the norm. Many agriculture workers had become weavers in these cottage industries because they were paid relatively well, and they were scared of English factories because they did resemble the poorhouses. I mean, horrible working conditions. And so factories are going to turn to child labor. And remember all those foundling hospitals and the abandoned children we've talked about, and they're going to become a main source of labor from local parishes and orphanages. And they're going to say, like, hey, bring those kids, we'll take care of them. Yeah, right, you'll take care of them. But the kids had always worked before. Even the kids not in the foundling homes. Remember we talked about the kids with the tubs and the wool and the dyeing of the wool. And the farming industry had been whole family. The cottage industry had been whole family. And now we're going to see these whole families in factories because children and parents typically worked 12-hour days, and they were unwilling to be separated because that was not the norm. They came as a unit to work the mills and mines. They worked together and made working long hours more tolerable because they were used to working as a family. Jobs for children in the cotton mills. We have children working for mothers or fathers collecting waste and piecing broken thread together. They're called piecers, okay? So we have our piecers, the broken thread. Here on the machines, they're going to step up. They're there with their parents who are running things. And then we also have what are known as scavengers. I mean, think you're a little kid, you like an adult, like I'm not going to fit under there. And so children would go in and they would gather up the things that drop below, or the pieces, and pick up the pieces that were underneath. But it's very dangerous. I mean, like these children like losing limbs, and their conditions weren't safe. In the mines, children are going to sort coal and work the ventilation equipment. Mothers will haul the coal down the narrow tunnels to the surface. Fathers will mine. And adult workers at this time were not necessarily eager to limit minimum working age hours of their children because they needed them to be there with them. That was the norm. But what's different is, remember, we've had that push towards a more loving relationship between parents and children. They're not willing to just let inhumane treatment of their children, go unmentioned. Because these kids were just like broken machines. I mean, just broken. And so Parliament is going to answer this call by the proletariats with the Sadler Commission, who is set on the task of investigating working conditions and will help initiate legislation to improve conditions in factories. Okay, so government investigations will lead to the fact, there's not a lot of safe working conditions, and eventually these will move to limit child labor. The Factory Act of 1833 will limit the workday for children ages 9 to 13 to 8 hours a day. I mean, whoa, that's a huge, can you imagine today if you were expected that? And, look at 14 to 18, that's your age. Limits it to 12 hours. There you go. I hope you're happy with your 12 hours. And prohibited the hiring of children under the age of 9. Because now we're going to see this push of limiting hours is going to equal education. But it's going to start to separate families, because these factory workers are going to then have to be required to establish schools where the children grow all day while the parents are working. So ironically, these improvements to the humane conditions of children are going to destroy the pattern of family working together, and employment of children will decline rapidly. And then you have just a mention of the Mines Act. It's pretty much like the Factory Act, except it's going to deal with children in the mines and prohibit all boys and girls under the age of 10 working underground. I mean, because you can just imagine, during those growth years, being underground. I mean, that's just going to follow naturally. So what are the social effects of industrialization? First, urbanization was the most important sociological effect. This is a huge transition. Cities, Huge. Largest population transfer in human history from rural to urban. The second one, I mean, I almost think this is going to overtake and become the first. Like maybe you will still be young enough and in college that this might, but the rural to urban push in China right now might actually dwarf this push during the industrialization, but that is just to be seen. British factory towns are going to grow into large industrial centers such as Manchester because they're close to coal, iron, and water. Most people prior to industrialization had lived in the south, but coal and iron are located in the north. In 1785, then only 3 cities with more than 50,000 people existed in England and Scotland, but by 1820, 31 British cities will have 50,000 people or more. The role of the city will change in the 19th century from being focused primarily on being a government center and a cultural center to being industrial center. So the whole function of our big cities are going to change. Although living conditions did not differ much from those on farms at this time, like really, like, you know, if you were a proletariat out on the farm, a laborer, your life wasn't that much different. It's just so, like, if you look at these pictures, like, I mean, you get everybody together. It is just so much, it just makes you feel like it was worse. It's just more in your eye, okay? Workers are going to begin to unite, so those labor unions, again, because of economic dissatisfaction, they're doing all the work while the middle class is having their golden age. And working class injustices, gender exploitation, and the standard of living issues will become the 19th century's greatest social and political dilemmas. Circle number 2, because we're going to be treading down this road as we move forward. And so what are those family issues and the gender issues? Well, family structure and gender roles within the family are going to be altered, I mean, pretty much forever with industrializations. Families as an economic unit were no longer the chief unit of both production and consumption. Families were less closely bound together than in the past. They aren't doing everything together. Okay? Productive work had been taken out of the home, and that's one of the reasons. As factory wages for skilled adult males rose, women and children will be separated from the workplace, and this is just for the middle class. And so those families that had always been together are going to come to, like, the only time is nighttime. And when you think about how long, okay, so school is your job, teaching is my job. I mean, how many of the hours do you spend at home versus how many you spend at, you know, work? And so that's going to be a huge difference here. I mean, when's the last time you had more than like a 10-minute conversation with your parents? You might think it's a good thing, but they've been used to being together all the time. Gender roles are going to change because roles at home and domestic life are going to emerge slowly. Married women in the middle class, we're still talking about middle class here, are going to become associated with domestic duties. So this is where that shift of where you work side by side with your husband is going to totally change. You stay home and you are now going to be expected to create like a nurturing environment or like this utopia at home for them to come and prop their feet up when they get done working. For the middle class women, now proletariat, like the lower, are still going to have to be working because there's just not, because of the working conditions, not enough pay. Okay? But this is where we get that statement of like home sweet home. From this period, middle class women are supposed to make this domestic refuge for their husbands to come home to from work. Like, put your feet up, you've been working all day. And so, but not the proletariat, so keep that in mind. Irish workers, we're going to need to talk about in a little bit of a different light, because the Irish are kind of like that. Have you ever read that book Collapse? Are going to be in this unique situation where the population is increased, but they're still primarily agricultural, and industrialization has not reached there. So Irish workers are going to increasingly come to Great Britain and become urban workers because it's not available in Ireland. And one of the things the Industrial Revolution did is that it stemmed human catastrophes resulting from population growth. Okay, if the Industrial Revolution hadn't been able to spread to the continent past England, we may have seen a lot more of these, because Ireland, not being industrialized based on agriculture, landlords who hold the land are mainly in Britain, but they're so consumed with what's going on in Britain, they're not helping to improve the agricultural condition. And then we're going to have this disease in the potato crop that's going to increase along with fever epidemics. So we're going to have some disease from malnutrition. I mean, duh, that happened. We talked about it multiple times. And it's going to result in the Great Famine, with at least 1.5 million people dying. We're going to have a massive exodus from Ireland between 1845 and 1851. In 1840 to 1855, most, as we know from our U.S. history, coming here or Britain. And by 1911, the Irish population will be only 4.4 million compared with 8 million in 1845. And the British government, consumed with trying to stay number one, is not going to have an adequate response for this famine. And so what we can see from industrialization is that without industrialization, with rapid population growth, as in Ireland, similar things may have happened throughout Europe. I mean, I don't even know just a little bit of industrialization that Russia and Western Germany and Southern Italy had, keeps something this devastating from happening. So industrialization, we could have had a lot more places in collapse if it had not been for industrialization. So we need to talk about, and there's my slide on the Irish potato famine. You can do some extra stuff if you want to with that, but really just talking about how industrialization prevented greater catastrophes like this from happening. So the historical debate on the Industrial Revolution, we have side A, the capitalist, and side B, the socialist and communist. Very different outlooks on industrialization and what it did to the world. So we'll start with A, the capitalist viewpoint, because that just seems appropriate for, where we are. Saw the Industrial Revolution as the positive step towards fulfilling human wants and needs. Like, it's the best thing ever. It increased the standard of living. It provided power to replace backbreaking human labor. Wealth is available for human consumption. We can have more things, more foods. Vast amounts of food, clothing, and energy were produced. And workers of the world, it's made available to them, although, their wages not until the 1850s there to support buying it. Life expectancy will increase. Luxuries become more commonplace. Leisure time is more enjoyable, where of course it is, because you're working all day, so any free time becomes enjoyable. And human catastrophe, like the Irish potato famine in Ireland, was largely avoided in areas experiencing industrialization. So that's what side A would say. Side B, the socialist and communist would say, which are, later Engels and Marx, view it as the further exploitation of the have-nots by the haves. They just see it as a continuation of that hierarchy. Okay, they're just saying, but it's going to intensify it. Workers will not begin to share in dramatic increase in standard of living until the second half of the 19th century. We talked about 1850. You can see a little bit improvement due to low wages, poor working conditions, etc. During the first century of industrialism, the wealth created went almost exclusively to the entrepreneur and the owner of capital, the middle class. So this tension between the working class and the golden age of the middle class is going to be the tension that leads us into our next unit and the rise of socialism and communism.